The room erupted in cheers when my brother announced they were expecting their 5th child. Then my mother stood up, pointed directly at me, and volunteered me to help raise the baby. Everyone laughed like it was already decided. What happened next shattered my family forever. My name is Emma Carter, and for most of my life, my family treated me less like a daughter and more like a backup plan. Not the favorite child. Not the successful child. Not the child everyone celebrated. Just the reliable one. The one they called when something went wrong. The one expected to sacrifice. The one who always cleaned up everyone else's mess, and my older brother Ryan. Ryan was the golden child. Always had been. Always would be. At least according to my parents. Growing up, Ryan could do no wrong. If he failed a test, it was because the teacher hated him. If I got straight A's, it was because I studied too much. If Ryan forgot Mother's Day, Mom said he was busy. If I forgot to call for one day, suddenly I was ungrateful. The rules were always different. Ryan received understanding. I received expectations. At 32 years old, I thought I'd finally escaped that dynamic. I had my own apartment, my own career, my own life. I worked as a project manager for a healthcare technology company and had spent years building a stable future for myself. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. Most importantly, I was independent. Or so I thought. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. It happened on a Sunday evening. My parents invited everyone over. The entire family gathered around their large dining table. My brother Ryan arrived with his wife Jessica and their 4 children. The kids immediately turned the house into chaos. Someone spilled juice. Someone started crying. Someone knocked over a lamp. And somehow, everyone acted like this was perfectly normal. I sat quietly sipping iced tea. Across the table, Jessica looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Her smile looked forced. Honestly, I felt sorry for her. 4 children under 10 years old was already overwhelming. Then halfway through dinner, Ryan stood up holding a glass. He tapped it with a spoon. Everyone stopped talking. His face lit up. "I have an announcement." Instantly, my mother's eyes sparkled. "Oh my God," she gasped. Ryan grinned. Jessica looked nervous. Then he said the words, "We're having another baby." The room exploded. Cheers, applause, happy screams. My mother literally started crying. My father jumped up to hug Ryan. Even the kids began shouting excitedly. Only Jessica looked terrified. And honestly, so did I. Because while everyone celebrated, one thought crossed my mind. How were they going to afford a 5th child? Ryan changed jobs every year. Jessica hadn't worked since their 2nd child. Their finances were already stretched thin. I knew because every few months they borrowed money from someone, usually my parents. Sometimes me. But nobody else seemed concerned. Everyone focused on celebrating. Then my mother stood up. She wiped tears from her face. And that's when everything went wrong. She looked directly at me, smiled, then said words I'll never forget. "Well, thank goodness Emma can help with the baby." The room fell silent for a moment. I laughed awkwardly, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. My father nodded immediately. "Exactly." Ryan smiled too. Jessica suddenly looked relieved. A very bad sign. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Mom waved her hand casually. "You work from home several days a week." "I work hybrid," I corrected. "Same thing." "No, it isn't." She ignored me. "Ryan and Jessica are already overwhelmed. Family helps family." I stared at her. "Are you asking me to babysit occasionally?" My mother frowned. "Babysit?" The way she said it made me realize I'd misunderstood. Completely. She looked confused that I would even use the word. "No, sweetheart." Then she smiled. The same smile she'd used my entire childhood whenever she expected me to give something up. We figured you'd move in for a while after the baby arrives. I nearly dropped my glass. The room suddenly felt very hot. What? Ryan nodded. As extra support, Jessica quickly added, just until we adjust. I looked around the table. Everyone appeared completely serious. Like they'd already discussed this, without me. Like the decision had already been made. I laughed again. Only this time nobody joined me, because nobody else thought it was a joke. My father leaned forward. It makes sense. No, I said immediately. It doesn't. The smiles began disappearing. Mom crossed her arms. Emma. No. Ryan sighed dramatically. Can you at least hear us out? I stared at him. You volunteered me before even talking to me. Mom looked offended. We assumed you'd want to help. There it was, the guilt, the expectation, the pressure, the same manipulation I'd experienced my entire life. Only this time I wasn't 12 years old anymore. I wasn't 17. I wasn't 22. I was 32 years old, an adult, and suddenly I was tired. Tired in a way I couldn't fully explain. Tired of sacrificing. Tired of being expected to solve everyone else's problems. Tired of being treated like a family resource instead of a person. I stood up. Congratulations on the baby. Ryan frowned. Emma. But I'm not moving in. Silence. Absolute silence. My mother's face hardened. You haven't even considered it. I considered it. My voice remained calm. The answer is no. Jessica looked disappointed. Ryan looked annoyed. My father looked angry. Mom looked personally betrayed, as if I'd just committed some terrible crime. Family helps family, she repeated. I smiled slightly. Funny. What? When I needed help after my surgery 3 years ago, nobody was available. The room became uncomfortable. Ryan shifted in his chair. Mom looked away, because they remembered. I certainly did. 3 years earlier, I'd undergone emergency surgery. Nothing life-threatening, but recovery had been difficult. I'd asked for help. Just a few days. Nobody came. Ryan was busy. Jessica had the kids. Mom and Dad were helping Ryan renovate his kitchen. I spent 2 weeks alone, ordering groceries, managing pain, taking care of myself. Nobody volunteered then. Nobody sacrificed then. Apparently family helped family only when family meant Ryan. Mom's voice turned cold. That was different. Of course it was. I grabbed my purse. Good night, everyone. Then I left. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning my phone started ringing at 7:12 a.m. Mom, I ignored it. She called again, and again, and again. By lunchtime she'd called 13 times. Then came the texts. That one almost made me laugh. Supported me? Really? I didn't respond. By evening, Dad called, then Ryan, then Jessica, then my aunt, then my grandmother. Somehow the entire family had already heard a version of events where I was refusing to help a struggling pregnant mother. Not the real story, not the part where they'd volunteered my life without asking. No, just enough information to make me look selfish, classic. By Wednesday, things escalated. I was finishing a work meeting when someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it and froze. My parents stood there. Ryan stood beside them. Jessica too. The entire delegation. Wonderful. Mom pushed past me before I could stop her. We need to settle this. I stared in disbelief. They walked inside like they owned the place. Ryan sat down on my couch. Dad folded his arms. Jessica looked nervous. I remained standing. What exactly are you doing here? Mom sighed dramatically. Trying to understand why you're punishing your family. Punishing. Interesting word. I sat opposite them. No one is being punished. Ryan shook his head. You know how difficult this is for us. I laughed. You chose to have a fifth child. Jessica winced. Ryan glared. Mom immediately jumped in. Children are blessings. Then raise your blessing. The room exploded. Ryan stood up. Dad shouted. Mom looked horrified. Jessica started crying. Within seconds, complete chaos erupted. And for the first time in my life, I didn't back down. Because something had changed. Something inside me had finally snapped. Years of resentment. Years of favoritism. Years of being treated like a backup parent. A backup bank account. A backup solution. It all came rushing to the surface. And I finally said what I'd been holding back for decades. The words that would change everything. The words that would start a family war nobody saw coming. I looked directly at my parents, then at Ryan, and I said, Tell me the truth. Exactly how much money have you already promised them in my name? The silence that followed told me everything. Their faces changed instantly. And in that moment, I realized this was never just about babysitting. Not even close. There was something much bigger they were hiding. Something involving me. Something involving my future. And judging by the panic on their faces, I was about to discover exactly what it was. Emma discovers that her parents and brother may have made promises involving her finances and future. Without her knowledge, and their reaction suggests a secret far bigger than childcare is about to be exposed. The silence that followed my question was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the uncomfortable silence of an argument. Not the awkward silence after someone says something inappropriate. This was the silence of people who had just been caught. Ryan looked at my father. My father looked at my mother. Jessica suddenly became fascinated by the floor. And that's when I knew. I was right. Somehow, some way, they had involved me in plans I knew absolutely nothing about. I slowly sat back down. How much? Nobody answered. My pulse quickened. How much money have you promised them in my name? Mom recovered first. Her expression hardened. That's not what this is about. Then answer the question. Dad cleared his throat. Emma, you're overreacting. I laughed. The sound surprised even me, because there wasn't an ounce of humor in it. Am I? Ryan stood. We weren't promising your money. Weren't? The choice of words caught my attention immediately. Past tense. Not aren't, weren't. Meaning there had been discussions. Meaning there had been plans. Meaning I wasn't imagining any of this. Jessica looked increasingly uncomfortable. I turned toward her. What aren't they telling me? She immediately looked at Ryan. Bad sign. Very bad sign. Ryan's jaw tightened. Jessica. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like a warning. My stomach dropped. For the first time, I realized Jessica might not be entirely comfortable with whatever was happening either. Mom suddenly stood. We're leaving. No. Everyone looked at me. I rarely raised my voice. In fact, I almost never did. But I was done being dismissed. No one leaves until somebody tells me what's going on. Dad frowned. You don't get to make demands. Actually, in my apartment, I do. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Jessica did something unexpected. She started crying. Not the dramatic crying she'd done earlier. Not tears designed to manipulate. Real crying. Exhausted crying. Broken crying. And suddenly everything shifted. Ryan looked nervous. Jessica wiped her face. Then she whispered something that changed the entire conversation. I didn't know they never told you. The room froze. Ryan's face turned white. Mom looked horrified. Dad muttered a curse, and I felt my heart begin pounding. Told me what? Jessica immediately regretted speaking. I could see it. Ryan stepped toward her. Jessica. But she shook her head. No. For the first time since arriving, she looked angry. Not at me, at them, at all of them. I am so tired of this. Ryan's expression darkened. Stop. No. Jessica stood. Tears continued falling. You all keep acting like Emma owes everyone something. Nobody spoke. Jessica looked directly at me, and then she said words that hit me like a truck. They've been planning for you to move into the house for over a year. My entire body went cold. What? Ryan closed his eyes. Mom looked ready to faint. Jessica continued. They already converted the basement. I blinked. The basement? She nodded. The guest suite. My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. What about it? Jessica swallowed, then said it. They turned it into an apartment for you. I stared at her, then at Ryan, then at my parents. Nobody denied it. Nobody. Oh my God. Suddenly, dozens of strange moments over the past year came rushing back. My mother constantly asking if I planned to stay in my apartment forever. Dad suggesting I should save money by living with family. Ryan mentioning how useful it would be if someone helped with the kids. The strange comments, the subtle pressure, the endless hints. It all made sense now. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't because of baby number 5. They'd been planning this. For a year. Maybe longer. Without ever discussing it with me. Without asking, without permission. They had literally designed a future for me behind my back. I stood slowly. You built an apartment. Nobody spoke. You built an apartment expecting me to move in. Ryan rubbed his forehead. Mom looked away. That was answer enough. I couldn't believe it. Actually, that wasn't true. The worst part was that I could believe it, because this was exactly how my family operated. They decided. I complied. That was the system. The only problem? I wasn't complying anymore. After they left that night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation. The apartment, the planning, the assumptions, the entitlement. Every hour that passed made me angrier. By morning, I made a decision. I was going to see this basement apartment myself. Not because I intended to move in, because I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Proof that this insanity was real. Saturday afternoon, I drove to Ryan's house, the same house my parents had helped him buy. The same house they'd renovated. The same house where apparently my future had been designed without me. When I arrived, only Jessica was home. She opened the door and immediately looked relieved. Thank God. I frowned. What happened? She glanced behind her. The kids are upstairs. Then she lowered her voice. Come inside. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I followed her. The house looked chaotic. Toys everywhere. Laundry piled on furniture. Dishes stacked in the sink. Jessica looked exhausted. More exhausted than usual. As if she hadn't slept in weeks. She led me downstairs, then opened a door. I froze. Because she wasn't exaggerating. Not even slightly. The basement had been completely transformed. Fresh paint, new furniture, a small kitchen, a bedroom, a living area, a workspace, photographs on the walls, decorations, everything. It wasn't a guest room. It wasn't temporary housing. It looked permanent, like someone had built a life there. My life, without me. I slowly walked through the apartment, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed something. The photographs. I moved closer. My stomach dropped. They were pictures of me. Not family pictures. Not group photos. Pictures of me alone. Graduation photos. Work event photos. Birthday pictures. Even photos pulled from my social media. I stared in disbelief. What the hell? Jessica looked embarrassed. I told them it was creepy. Creepy? It was beyond creepy. It felt like walking into an alternate reality where everyone had agreed on my future except me. Then I noticed another detail. The desk on top sat a framed document. I picked it up and felt my blood run cold, because written across the top was a title. I looked at Jessica. Slowly. Very slowly. "What is this?" Her face went pale. She hadn't known that was there. Clearly. I opened the document. Monday through Friday. School drop-offs. School pickups. Meal preparation. Homework supervision. Laundry. Doctor appointments. Household management. Babysitting shifts. Weekend coverage. Every hour. Every responsibility. Planned, organized, assigned. To me. For the next 3 years. 3 years. 3 years. My hands started shaking. They hadn't wanted help. They'd wanted a live-in nanny. An unpaid nanny. Me. I sat down heavily, trying to breathe, trying not to explode. Jessica looked miserable. "I'm sorry." I laughed bitterly. "Were you planning to tell me?" She hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than the truth, because it meant she knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Eventually she nodded. "Ryan said your parents would convince you." Of course he did. Because nobody ever expected me to say no. Nobody ever imagined I'd have boundaries. Nobody ever considered I might want my own life. I looked around the apartment again, and suddenly something clicked. A question. One that hadn't occurred to me before. How did they afford this renovation? Jessica froze. My instincts immediately activated, because that reaction meant something. Something important. "Jessica." She looked away. "Jessica." Finally she whispered, "They took out a loan." I frowned. "So?" Her eyes filled with tears again. It was a very large loan. The pieces started moving into place, and I didn't like the picture they were creating. How large? Jessica swallowed, then told me the number, and my heart nearly stopped. $180,000. I stared at her. Surely I'd misheard. $180,000 for a basement renovation? That made no sense. None. Then she delivered the next bombshell. They expected you to help repay it. The room spun. I genuinely thought I might be sick. They had borrowed nearly $200,000. Created an apartment. Built an entire childcare plan, and somehow expected me to help pay for all of it, without ever discussing it, without consent, without agreement, without even informing me. I couldn't believe it. Then again, maybe I could, because suddenly I remembered something. 3 months earlier, my father had asked strange questions about my savings, my investments, my retirement account. At the time, I thought he was making conversation. Now it felt very different, very deliberate, very calculated. And the realization made me physically ill. That evening, I went home and started digging. For years, I'd ignored things, dismissed things, made excuses. Not anymore. I opened old emails, old text messages, old financial documents, anything, everything. And around midnight, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. An email, forwarded accidentally months earlier by my mother. At the time, I never opened the attachment. Now I did. And instantly wished I hadn't, because it revealed a secret that explained everything. A secret my parents had hidden from me for years. A secret involving my grandmother. A secret involving inheritance. A secret that completely changed my understanding of my family. As I read the document, my hands began trembling. My grandmother wasn't leaving her estate equally, not even close. And according to the paperwork, I was the primary beneficiary, not Ryan. Me. Suddenly every strange conversation, every manipulation, every demand, every expectation. Made horrifying sense. They weren't trying to make me move in because they needed help. At least not only because of that. They were positioning me, controlling me, managing me. Because somewhere in the future, a very large amount of money was involved. And if what I was reading was true, my family had been planning around that money long before I ever knew it existed. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. 1:47 p.m. I answered and heard my grandmother's voice. Weak, shaking, terrified. Emma. My heart stopped. Grandma? Her next words sent ice through my veins. Don't trust your parents. Then the line went dead. Emma discovers she is secretly the primary heir to her grandmother's estate, explaining why her family has been trying to control her future. Moments. Later, her grandmother calls with a chilling warning. Seconds later, the call disconnects. The call lasted less than 5 seconds. Yet those 5 seconds changed everything. Don't trust your parents. Then silence. Then the disconnected tone. I sat frozen on my couch, staring at my phone. My grandmother had never spoken to me like that. Never. She was the calm one. The peacemaker. The woman who spent her entire life smoothing over conflicts and protecting family relationships. For her to sound terrified? For her to specifically warn me about my parents? Something was very wrong. I immediately called back. No answer. Again. No answer. Again. Straight to voicemail. A horrible feeling settled in my stomach. I barely slept that night. By 6 a.m, I was already in my car driving toward my grandmother's house. The 40-minute drive felt like 4 hours. Questions raced through my mind. What did she know? Why was she scared? Why had she called me? And most importantly, why didn't she trust my parents? When I arrived, I noticed something strange immediately. My father's truck sat in the driveway. So did my mother's car. My stomach tightened. I parked across the street and watched. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, my parents exited the house. Both looked tense. My father carried a folder. My mother looked upset. Neither of them noticed me. The second they drove away, I crossed the street and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then the door slowly opened. My grandmother stood there. She looked exhausted, older than she had just a month earlier. But when she saw me, relief flooded her face. Emma. I immediately hugged her. Are you okay? She nodded. But I could tell she wasn't. Not really. I helped her sit down in the living room. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me and asked a question. Did they finally tell you? I already knew who she meant. No. Her shoulders slumped. Of course they didn't. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, then showed her the inheritance document. The moment she saw it, she closed her eyes, and everything became clear. It was real. Every word, every detail, every secret. My grandmother took a deep breath, then told me a story I'd never heard before. A story that began 25 years earlier. When my grandfather died, he left most of his assets to my grandmother. Several rental properties, investments, savings land. Over the years, those assets grew significantly, much more than anyone realized, including me. But before he died, my grandfather had one specific instruction. He wanted the inheritance eventually passed to the family member who demonstrated responsibility. Not entitlement, not greed, responsibility. For years, my grandmother watched everyone carefully, including her children, including her grandchildren, and eventually, she made a decision. A decision my parents never accepted. She chose me. Not Ryan. Me. Tears filled her eyes as she explained why. Because you never asked me for anything. My throat tightened. She smiled sadly. Ryan always wanted something. I couldn't argue with that, because it was true. My grandmother continued. She told me about loans she'd given my parents over the years, money they'd promised to repay, money that mysteriously never returned. She told me about helping Ryan start businesses, 3 different businesses, all failures, all funded by family. She told me about the countless times she'd watched everyone take, and take, and take, while I quietly built my own life, without demanding anything, without expecting rescue, without asking for handouts. Then she revealed the truth. The inheritance wasn't just large, it was life-changing, large enough to make people desperate, large enough to destroy families, large enough to explain everything. My hands trembled as she said the number, nearly $4 million. I couldn't breathe. 4 million. I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood. But she repeated it. $4 million. And according to her estate plan, almost all of it would eventually come to me. Suddenly, every strange behavior made sense. Every manipulation. Every guilt trip. Every attempt to control me. They weren't planning my future. They were protecting their access to money they thought would someday belong to them. Then my grandmother showed me something even worse. A folder. The same type of folder my father had been carrying when he left. Inside were documents, emails, letters, financial plans. And what I found nearly broke me, because my parents hadn't merely discussed my future. They'd planned it, in detail, without my knowledge, without my permission. There were spreadsheets, budgets, projected inheritance estimates, projected childcare costs, projected housing costs, even future distributions. One document had a title that made me physically sick. Family Asset Allocation. Plan. I opened it and stared. My inheritance had already been divided, on paper, by people who didn't own it. 40% to Ryan, 20% for his children, 10% to my parents, another portion for future family expenses. And my share? The money legally intended for me? Less than 20%. I felt numb. They'd already spent it, not literally, but mentally, emotionally, financially. They'd decided it belonged to them, and all those plans to move me into Ryan's basement? All. Those childcare schedules? All those expectations, they weren't acts of family support. They were control mechanisms. The closer I stayed to Ryan's family, the easier it would be to pressure me later. The easier it would be to guilt me. The easier it would be to manipulate me. And suddenly I understood my grandmother's fear. 3 days later, everything exploded. My grandmother called a family meeting. Nobody knew why. Everyone came. My parents, Ryan, Jessica, my aunt, several cousins, everyone. The atmosphere felt tense from the beginning, especially when they saw me sitting beside Grandma. Ryan looked nervous. My mother looked suspicious. My father looked angry. Then Grandma stood and spoke. For nearly 20 minutes. No interruptions, no arguments, no excuses. She calmly explained her estate plans. She explained her reasons. She explained her concerns. And finally, she revealed the truth. The room erupted. Ryan stood immediately. What? My mother burst into tears. My father turned red. My aunt looked shocked. Nobody had expected it. Especially not Ryan. Emma gets everything? Grandma corrected him. Not everything, but enough, more than enough. The reaction was ugly. Very ugly. Ryan didn't look disappointed. He looked furious. My father didn't look surprised. He looked exposed. Because now everyone knew. Everyone knew who had been trying to manipulate whom. Everyone knew why. Then Grandma did something unexpected. She pulled out the folder. The one containing all their plans, and she placed it on the table. Silence. Absolute silence. My father looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ryan immediately recognized it too. Nobody denied it, because they couldn't. The evidence was right there. Emails, budgets, schedules, inheritance projections, everything. Every ugly secret, every selfish plan, every attempt to control my life. Exposed. In front of the entire family. For the first time in my life. My parents had no defense. The months that followed changed everything. My grandmother immediately updated her estate plans. Not because she changed her mind, because she wanted additional protections. Legal protections. Strong protections, the kind impossible to challenge. She hired attorneys, financial advisors, trust administrators, everything. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents collapsed. Not overnight, but close. They tried apologizing. At first. Then bargaining. Then blaming. Then guilt. The usual cycle. Except this time it didn't work. Because once you see manipulation clearly, you can't unsee it. Ryan became even worse. For months he barely spoke to me. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because I represented something he believed he deserved. And that wasn't my responsibility. It never had been. Jessica eventually apologized. Genuinely. She admitted she'd ignored warning signs. She admitted she'd allowed herself to believe everyone else's assumptions. Most importantly, she admitted I deserved better. Oddly enough, she became the only member of that household I still respected. A year later, another surprise arrived. Not financial. Personal. My company offered me a major promotion. A promotion requiring relocation. A few years earlier, I might have refused. Out of guilt, out of obligation, out of family expectations. This time, I accepted immediately. 3 months later, I moved across the country. A fresh start, a better life. A future chosen by me, not assigned by someone else. The night before my flight, I visited my grandmother. We sat on her porch watching the sunset. Neither of us talked much. Eventually, she smiled. "You know what makes me happiest?" "What?" She squeezed my hand. "Not the inheritance." I laughed. "Good." She smiled. "It's seeing you finally live your own life." And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. My grandmother lived another 6 years. 6 wonderful years. Years filled with travel, family gatherings, birthday celebrations, and peace. When she eventually passed away, she did so knowing her wishes would be respected. The inheritance came exactly as planned. But something surprised me. The money wasn't what changed my life most. The freedom did. The realization that I never needed anyone's permission to protect my boundaries. The understanding that love and obligation are not the same thing, and the knowledge that being the reliable one does not mean sacrificing your entire future for people who would never do the same for you. My parents eventually learned a painful lesson. Children are not retirement plans. They are not backup bank accounts. They are not unpaid caregivers. And they are certainly not property. As for Ryan, raising 5 children turned out to be exactly as difficult as everyone predicted. But for the first time in his life, he had to solve his own problems. Not mine. Not our parents. His. And perhaps that was the greatest gift anyone could have given him. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, even when those boundaries inconvenience them. The people who become angry when you say no are often the ones benefiting most from your inability to say it. Never let guilt convince you to surrender a future you worked hard to build. Your life belongs to you, and nobody else gets to volunteer it on your behalf.